Hi, 7th and 8th graders. This is going to be a little bit different for you today. This is the stuff from our study on the Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. It's some of my favorite things to teach, and I couldn't allow, I couldn't just give it to you and say, read this. I want to talk to you about it too. And so we're going to try something out. Before you watch this and go through the Pear Deck site, I want you to click the link below and watch the video that we would have watched in class if we were all together. And then after you're done watching the video, then come here, and what I want you to do is have this video open in one tab, and then you can have Pear Deck open in the other tab. Now you don't need to see my face. I have more of a face for radio anyway, so you can just play this and hear the audio for it if you want to do that. And as we talk about things, we'll go through the stuff on the Pear Deck. Now it's a student paced, so you can click through. You don't need. It's not like in class where I choose to go to the next slide. So the Pear Deck you go to is joinpd.com, and then the code is oypkv. Orange yards pursue keen violas. Orange yards pursue keen violas. And that's at joinpd.com. So once you go in there, you can go through and see the questions, respond to the questions, just like we were in class. So let's get into it then. All right, so after you've watched the video, let's look at the first question. And that first question is number 1. Was Jesus a real person in history? Give a brief historical, but perhaps not spiritual, description of general events surrounding his life and death. So in this, just respond to was Jesus real? And according to what you know about Jesus, what are some things that happened in his life? So we're going to write 5 of those things down. It'd be great if you could write them in chronological order, but if not, that's okay. So write down 5 things that happened in Jesus' life. Now, if you need more time to do that, of course you probably will. You just pause the video, and then you can write your answer down. Now let's take a look at the fast fact here on the next slide. Corroborative evidence. Webster's dictionary defines corroborate this way: to make more certain, confirm. He corroborated my account of the accident. Corroborative evidence supports other testimony. It affirms or backs up the essential elements of an eyewitness account. It can be a public record, a photograph, or additional testimony from a second or third person. It can verify a person's entire testimony, or just key parts of it. In effect, corroborative evidence acts like the support wires that keep a tall antenna straight and unwavering. The more corroborative evidence, the stronger and more secure the case. So think about corroborative evidence as, those other things that we know, other details that we know that we can use to say, oh yeah, that probably did happen. So let's take a look at the second one here, the second question. It says, describe an incident in which you doubted someone's story until he or she offered some corroborating evidence. What criteria helped you determine the level of relevancy of this supporting evidence? So think about a time maybe where you were trying to tell someone, or someone told you, and you didn't believe them at first. You needed more evidence. And it wasn't until you had more evidence that you said, okay, sure, I guess that probably happened. And when it says what criteria helped you determine the level of relevancy of the supporting evidence, so how did you decide that the new evidence, how did you decide that it was good enough? How do you know that it was good enough evidence to allow the person to believe it's true? Now, for my life, here's a story. This is a story that my brother Jacob and I share. And if all goes well, there'll be a separate video and assignment about this story in itself. But it was the year 2000, so I was think, 5th or 6th grade. It was April of 2000. Actually, it was April Fool's Day. It was April Fool's Day, and it was also Maundy Thursday, the Thursday before Easter. That's how it fell that year. And I think it was 2000. It might have been a year around there, but you can double check to see which year Maundy Thursday fell on April 1st. But anyway, so in our front, we lived in the town of New Minden, about an hour or so south of Litchfield on 127. And our dad was the pastor. We lived right next to the church. And we had a pretty big yard. And across the street from us, across 127, was there was a field that it was a spring, so wheat had been planted in. I don't remember exactly how. It was April, so I don't know exactly how far the wheat was along. But so there's a field across. There's our house and our yard. Then Illinois 127, a regular nice paved 2-lane road, and then there's a field on the other side. Right, we're right outside the small village of New Minden. So we that late afternoon, early evening, we are my brother Jacob, who's 3 years older than I, and our friend John Stevenson and I, we were playing wiffle ball in the front yard. And a regular wiffle ball game. It was going well, and then all of a sudden, across the street, pulls up a guy in a truck. He has one of those shirts on, those working shirts, and it says, Steve, or his name's on his shirt there. And he gets out of his car and he says, "Hey, any of you fellers seen one of them emu? Big bird about yay big?" And we said, "No, we have not seen any emus walking around." Now, an aside, an emu is a large bird native to Australia, kind of like an ostrich, big flightless bird. And about 5 miles one way, we had there were some members of the congregation who did have an emu farm, but we hadn't seen any emus going around. They did a pretty good job taking care of them, as far as I know. And we thought it was just. And after we played we haven't seen an emu. The guy drives off, and we, the three of us, double over laughing. How silly that there is, he's looking for an emu walking around New Minden. And so we went back to playing wiffle ball, and then a short time later, John says, "Oh, look!" And across the street, in the field that where the wheat was coming up, we see this majestic emu strutting and walking across the field. The guy was right. There was an emu on the loose, and now we'd seen it. Now, we didn't take his number information down to let him know, but there was an emu out walking around. We thought it was the funniest thing. Now remember, it's April 1st. So we go inside and tell Mom and Dad, "Mom, Dad, this guy drove over, he said there's an emu." And then we wait, it's funny, and then he drove away. And then minutes later, an emu, sometime later, an emu was walking on the road across, was walking in the field across the street. And again, it's April Fool's Day, so our dad, Pastor Miller, didn't believe us. He didn't believe that his sons and their friend had seen an emu walking across the street. It wasn't until he heard other reports of other people seeing the emu too. Other grown-ups that he trusted had agreed and corroborated. Yes, there was indeed an emu walking around, and yes, it makes sense. Your sons may have seen the emu walking around. It turns out it belonged to a gal named Bonnie Hoffman, who lived, 3 or 4 miles the other way from our house, and she was one of my Sunday school teachers. She was awesome. She always slipped me juicy fruit in church, the gum. What a wonderful godly woman that helped bring me up in the faith. And it turns out, years later we found out that it was her emu. But it wasn't until my dad had that corroborating evidence that he actually believed that there was, in fact, an emu. So have you had an incident like that? Go ahead, and if you do, go and share that there on Pear Deck. All right, let's go to the next slide. Think about this. Lee Strobel, Paul Meyer, and Edwin Yamauchi. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of his name. So here's from Lee Strobel. Let's pretend we didn't have any of the New Testament or other Christian writings. Even without them, what would we be able to conclude about Jesus from ancient non-Christian sources, such as Josephus, the Talmud, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, and others? So think about it. Basically what he's asking is, hey, without the Bible, what would we know about Jesus? You would think if Jesus is so important in history, right? It's our dating system for the years is based on Jesus' life. You would think that there'd be some people who said something about Jesus besides the Bible, and there are. So let's hear this. Now, this is from. This next quote is from historian Paul Meyer from Western Michigan University. I've heard him talk before. He's an LCMS guy. He was one of the vice presidents of the Senate for a while, as well as a professor. His joke was that he knew it was time for him to retire when, instead of being called a professor of ancient history, people referred to him as an ancient professor of history. Maybe you found that funny. I found it funny. All right. So Paul Meyer says, often the same people, places, and events referenced inside Scripture are cited also in non-biblical materials. These range from a myriad of geographical place names to the hard evidence by archaeology, to a host of documents that have come down to us from the ancient world that correlate completely with the biblical evidence. As we dig more and more in the Middle East and learn about the archaeology from biblical times, it's confirming what we have in the Bible. There's also these writings. We'll talk more about the writings in a second. They're going to blow you away. Here's what the historian Edwin Yamauchi from Miami of Ohio University. So not Miami in Florida, it's from the Miami in Ohio. There was a Native Americans who lived in Ohio called the Miami, and that's how the university got its name. So here's what he has to say. Even without the New Testament, we would still have a considerable amount of important historical evidence about Jesus. In fact, it would provide a kind of outline for the life of Jesus. We would know first that Jesus was a Jewish teacher. Second, many people believed that he performed healings and exorcisms. Third, some people believed he was the Messiah. Fourth, he was rejected by Jewish leaders. Fifth, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate in the reign of Tiberius, the Roman emperor at the time. And sixth, despite this shameful death, his followers, who believed that he was still alive, spread beyond Palestine, so that there were multitudes of them in Rome by AD 64. And seventh, all kinds of people from the cities and countryside, men and women, slave and free, worshipped him as God. So even without the New Testament, that's what we could know about Jesus. And here's what Lee Strobel says. There was indeed an impressive amount of independent corroboration. Not only can the contours of Jesus' life be reconstructed apart from the Bible, but there's even more that can be gleaned about him from material so old that it actually predates the Gospels themselves. So, there's things that were even written down before the Gospels were written down about Jesus that we can learn about Jesus from. Let's take a look at the next slide there. It's, I think now that I think about this, yeah, Josephus. Josephus was a very important Jewish historian of the first century. He was born in the year AD 37, so he was born 4 years after Jesus died. And he wrote most of his 4 works toward the end of the first century. He was a priest, a Pharisee, and he was somewhat egotistical. His most ambitious work was called the Antiquities, which was a history of the Jewish people from creation until his time. He probably completed it about AD 93. So we have this guy Josephus. He was a Jewish historian that lived, he's kind of the next generation after Jesus, and he wrote a history of the Jewish people. Let's see what he has to say. Go to the, a little more to read about Josephus, and then we'll have question number 3. Here's from the Antiquities. He convened a meeting of the Sanhedrin, that's the Jewish leaders, and brought before them a man named James, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, and certain others. He accused them of having transgressed the law and delivered them up to be stoned. So Josephus here is telling about how James, the brother of Jesus, we'll talk more about James in a later lesson, and we'll talk about how James, and the awesome evidence that James is for Jesus' divinity. But here Josephus is saying, yeah, there's this guy James, brother of Jesus, who people said was the Messiah, the Christ, and the Jewish leaders said, no, you guys are breaking our Jewish law and saying that, and they were put to death. They were stoned to death. Now here, this is another thing from Josephus from the writing Testimonium Flavianum. I am multilingual in my ability to mispronounce names, so my apologies to those who know the correct pronunciation. Here's what Josephus says. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles, when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had him condemned to the cross. Those that loved him first did not forsake him, and the tribe of Christians so named for him are not extinct to this day. So there's Josephus saying, yeah, there was this Jesus. We had, the Jewish leaders had him sent to Pontius Pilate, who had him crucified. And his disciples, they didn't forsake him. They, to this day, they're still Christians. Now, he's not disputing the detail that, that night, in the garden, the disciples ran away. No, he's saying is, after Jesus died, the disciples didn't give up on Jesus. Something, so there's no evidence. Oh, well, even though their leader died, they still said these things about Jesus. So here's back to what Edwin M. Yamauchi says. Josephus corroborates important information about Jesus, that he was the martyred leader of the church in Jerusalem, that he was a wise teacher who had established a wide and lasting following, despite the fact that he had been crucified under Pilate at the investigation of some of the Jewish leaders. Josephus' accounts of the Jewish war have proved to be very accurate. For example, they've been corroborated through archaeological excavations at Masada, as well as by historians like Tacitus. He's considered a pretty reliable historian, and his mentioning of Jesus is considered extremely important. So one of the other big writings that Josephus had was about the wars. There was a Jewish revolt shortly after the time where, in Josephus' lifetime, where the Jews revolted against the Romans, and for a while it looked like they were doing okay, but it ends up not going very well. The Romans, the general Vespasian and his son Titus, they take Jerusalem. Those guys would later on become emperors. and it's actually Vespasian's brother, Sabinus, who Paul Meyer, that historian we talked about earlier, believes is the guy that Luke wrote both the Gospel of Luke and Acts to. But that's another topic. Another thing that happens in the Jewish wars is their last stronghold is a place called Masada, and the rebels holding out there. It was this a palace Herod built on top of a mountain. It was a good place to defend, but the Romans were finally taking them. And in a sad story, these Jewish rebels decided they were all going to commit suicide instead of being taken alive. And anyway, these stories that we have from the wars against the Rome between the Jews and the Romans that Josephus writes are super accurate. So when you have the super accurate historian also saying, hey, yeah, there's this guy Jesus too, and he was put to death, and his followers still believe in him. Now, that's pretty powerful information. Let's look at question number 3 now. How does the fact that the Jewish historian Josephus gives accurate accounts of other historical details support his accounts of Jesus and the early Christians? Well, think about it this way. We've all heard the story of the boy who cried wolf, right? The boy lies about a wolf coming, and then the townspeople come, and there's no wolf, and again he says the lie again, and the townspeople come again, and finally, when the wolf actually comes, no one believes the boy because he said lies in the past. Well, with Josephus, it's kind of that fable in reverse, because Josephus is accurate. He's an accurate historian. The details and stuff that he gives have been proven to be true by other pieces of evidence. So when Josephus is writing about Jesus, you can say, hey, yeah, this is even historians who don't believe in what that Jesus really is the Son of God, they say, well, Josephus, gives us good evidence here that Jesus was an actual person. And Josephus isn't a Christian. So let's hear some other testimony from people who aren't Christians themselves. Here's next. Think about this. Tacitus. Here's our friend Edwin Yamauchi again. He says, Tacitus, who's a Roman historian, his picture's there on Pear Deck for you, recorded what is probably the most important reference to Jesus outside the New Testament. In AD 115, he explicitly states that Nero, the Emperor Nero, persecuted Christians as scapegoats to divert suspicion away from himself for the great fire that had devastated Rome in AD 64. Here's what Tacitus says in his the Annals, his writing. Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class of hated for their abomination, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. Then upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of a crime of firing the city as of the hatred against mankind. Now, the way Tacitus writes, what would you say he thinks about Christians? Does Tacitus have a positive view of Christians? No, not at all. He says their hatred against mankind, right? He says when he talks about Christianity starting, he talks about it's the source of evil, right? Where it starts is the source of evil. So let's take a look at the next question then. Question 4 says, how does the fact that Tacitus does not align himself with Christians affect your confidence in the reliability of his outside evidence for Jesus? Do you think he was trying to promote Christianity? Do you think he believed that Jesus was a real historical figure? Now, as a teacher, there are times where two students are in trouble, or there's a conflict between two students, and they disagree with who started it and what happened, and so forth. When you have two students talking about something, and say we have they're on the playground, and Johnny is upset that Jimmy has hit him, right? And so Johnny comes and he says, Jimmy hit me. Jimmy, he needs to be in trouble. He hit me. And Jimmy says, "Oh, well, that's because you called me stupid. That's why I hit you. I can't stand for that." And if I were to ask Johnny, "Well, did you call him stupid?" And if he says, "Oh, yeah, okay. Well, I did call him that. Yes." Now, if someone who doesn't, who's against the person who wronged them, they're arguing with them, if there's a point that they can see, say, "Okay, yes, this is true. I will admit that I called him stupid," right? Well, as the person trying to figure out what happened, I can be pretty well sure that that's what happened. If they both agree on that, even the one who's upset, if he agrees with the other guy about one thing that happened, yeah, you can be pretty sure that part happened. There might be other details they disagree about, but that central thing that they both agree on, even though he's arguing against it, against the bigger picture of it, that gives me a pretty good indication. Hey, yeah, that really happened. So when Tacitus says these things about Christians, where he says, "Yeah, hey, this happened," that can give us pretty good evidence. Tacitus is not a fan of Christians. He's not a fan of Christians at all, but the information he does leave about Christians is, oh yeah, this is probably true. We can probably know that to be true. Think about, later on when we talk about that on Easter morning the tomb is empty, right? The Pharisees and the chief priests, they don't debate that the tomb is empty. They have a story for why the tomb's empty, but they're not saying, "Oh, well, the body's still in the tomb." They're willing to admit and go on, yeah, the tomb is empty. Let's talk about some other evidence. All right, this is, we have Pliny the Younger, and Tertullian and Pelagian. Pliny the Younger, here's another from Edwin Yamochi. He says, "Pliny the Younger was the nephew of Pliny the Elder, the famous encyclopedist who died in the eruption of Vesuvius in AD 79, right, at Pompeii. That's where his uncle died. Pliny the Younger became governor of Bithynia in northwestern Turkey, today's northwestern Turkey, and much of his correspondence with his friend, Emperor Trajan, has been preserved to this present time." So Pliny the Younger is a Roman emperor during the time of Trajan, years later, and here's what he has to say. This is him writing to the emperor. He says, "I have asked them if they are Christians, and if they admit it, I repeat the question a second and third time, with a warning of punishment awaiting them. If they persist, I order them to be led away for execution, for whatever the nature of their admission, I am convinced that their stubbornness and unshakable obstinacy ought not to go unpunished. They also declared that the sum total of their guilt or error amounted to no more than this, that they have met regularly before dawn on a fixed day to chant verses alternately amongst themselves in honor of Christ, as if to a god, and also to bind themselves by oath, not for any criminal purpose, but to abstain from theft, robbery, and adultery. This made me decide that it was all the more necessary to extract the truth by torture from two slave women, whom they called deaconesses. I found nothing but a degenerate sort of cult carried to extravagant lengths." So Pliny the Younger, he's persecuting Christians, and he's saying, "Yeah, Trajan, so I'm killing these Christians. How stubborn are they? They won't give up their faith in their God. Christians, they loved they love God a lot more than the Romans loved their gods. And the Romans were kind of confounded by, oh yeah, okay, gods are important, but you guys really, your God's really a big deal to you. And he's like, and well, here's what they do. You know, they meet before dawn on a day, and they chant hymns, and they bind themselves and promise not to do theft, robbery, and adultery. You know, this is what they're doing. You know, and it kind of sounds like he's like, well, there must be something more that they're up to. So he tortures two people to try to find out if there's more that's going on. So we have Pliny the Younger. He gives good evidence. Hey, this is who Christians were. This is how they worshipped early in the church. Now here's Tertullian and Pelagian. Lee Strobel says, to me, one of the most problematic references in the New Testament is where the gospel writers claim that the earth went dark during part of the time that Jesus hung on the cross. Right? You know, we say that it is probably around from noon to 3 p.m. When Jesus is on the cross, the earth goes dark. Wasn't this, and you know, he's questioning, he said, wasn't this merely just a literary device to stress the significance of the crucifixion and not a reference to an actual historical occurrence? You know, did that, are the guys who wrote the gospel, were they just saying that to make a point, or was the sky really dark? After all, if darkness had fallen over all the earth, wouldn't there be at least some mention of this extraordinary event outside the Bible? Well, that'd be great if there was, right? Well, guess what? Here's what they say. This phenomenon evidently was visible in Rome, Athens, and other Mediterranean cities. According to Tertullian, it was a cosmic or world event. Pelagian, a Greek author from Caria, writing a chronology soon after 137 A.D., reported that in the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad, better known for us today as 33 A.D., the year that Jesus died, there was the greatest eclipse of the sun, and then it became night in the 6th hour of the day, noon, and so the stars even appeared in the heavens. There was a great earthquake in Bithynia, and many things were overturned in Nicaea. That's from historian Paul Meyer. So think about it. That's a big deal. That the earth, we say, yeah, it really got dark. The other historians, people who aren't Christians, say, well, yeah, there's that day back in 33, well, today we call 33, where it was dark for 3 hours. That was kind of weird. All over the world, it was dark. Maybe it's because it really happened. That while Jesus was on the cross, it did become dark. So let's take a look at our next question here. And the question